Good morning. Happy to be here. And I'm happy that you have so many regulatory questions for me. So that's a great start. My presentation will focus on the regulations in Israel, and we have quite a vast regulatory system. I'll try to go over it in a few minutes. I'll start with just 2 slides about our company, so get to know us better. So our company was established some 18 years ago. As I've said, we are the leading company in Israel that gives consultancy to the F&B market. Regulatory affairs is my hat for today, but we also deal with food quality and safety issues, environmental care, health and safety issues, and we give a lot of presentations, training, learning opportunities, nowadays webinars and all kinds of things that you can do online, obviously. We work with many companies. We're proud to be also working with Corinne, her team, and Shufasal as the biggest retail chain, as you heard Corinne's amazing presentation. I imagine that on the right side, you can identify some global brands that we work with, whether here in Israel, imported by various importers or retail chains, and also directly, as I've mentioned before, with companies that just want to export to Israel and want to know and feel the regulatory framework here, so they address us directly. So you can look for yourself for the brands that you know. We are also lecturing, personally I'm lecturing for regulatory affairs in various academic institutions. And on the left side, you can see our very vibrant food tech companies. We have working closely with all kinds of amazing companies that have various solutions to the international market. We're helping them with a very, let's say, challenging issues they have with regulatory affairs. They are not regular food products, they're innovative. So you can see many of the logos on the left side. So just get right to the issues, and I'm very happy to see that, you know, Aliyah, Osaf, Raji, you had some questions. I hope to answer you in this presentation, and if not, afterwards. I'll just mention that we're proud members of the Chamber of Commerce, as I've said, and I'm a member of the international committee within the Chamber. So happy to be here again. So I call my presentation 10 Food Commandments, 10 Food Importing Commandments. So as you might know, regulation all over the globe is complex. It's not an easy thing to grasp in 10, 15 minutes. So I'm just going to highlight the things that I think will benefit you the most, and feel free to address me afterwards. So first thing I should say is that the field is full of players. What I mean by that is that we have quite a few players in the regulatory affairs arena. The major player, I think, for most of you would be the Ministry of Health. The Ministry of Health is the most maybe important or crucial gateway to entering Israel. Of course, it depends on the kind of goods that you're planning to export, but he's the main one that will address you or be in contact with you, or with your importers, consultants, and so on, when trying to export to Israel. The second large body that you might meet if you're in the grain business, seeds, all kinds of raw meat, eggs, and so on and so forth, is the Ministry of Agriculture. Again, they have their own system of regulatory affairs that have to do with import. We'll talk a bit about that, mostly about the Ministry of Health. I think it's more relevant for all of you. I'll mention in a few words the Ministry of Economy and Industry, because they play a role also in some of the regulatory affairs. They have their own print on the market. They deal with things that have to do with consumer goods and some regulations there. And we have something that is quite unique. It's not unique by itself. Many countries have a standards institution, but our standards, most of them or many of them in the food arena, are compulsory. So they're not just guidelines or or as something that you might look at as a professional document, but are really compulsory and they have a bearing on your products and on their labeling. So it won't be a great surprise for you, I guess, at least those of you who deal with regulatory affairs, but Israeli regulation is complex, and is complex because we have all kinds of laws, regulations, guidelines, general standards, product standards, so many different layers of regulation that you must navigate through. And that's not such an easy job. In 2015, some 5-6 years ago, we had a very fundamental law that entered into force in Israel, and it had a bearing on all the chain, all the food chain, and it has all the let's say basic or crucial points that you should know about regulatory affairs. Unfortunately, like many of the regulation in Israel, I'll speak about it in a minute, is in Hebrew. So all the things I'm talking about, unfortunately, for you guys, and happily for me, they're in Hebrew. So you need to know that. Anyway, one of the things that I would recommend you to do, because I'm trying to make it practical for you, that actually you must know your stuff. What I mean that you must know your stuff is that once you want to enter Israel, and I've seen some questions on the Q&A, you need to know first thing that your product complies. Before you're checking, like labeling and stuff, and maybe a minute after talking with the importers and retailers about the financial feasibility of your exporting to Israel, you need to know that your product complies. Because if not, it's an issue that you must address. So first thing would be if there is a compliance with the product. Secondly will be the labeling compliance. So I'm not talking about taking your own label and asking yourself, well, does it comply? Because it won't. First thing, it should be in Hebrew. But otherwise, other than that, you need to know that Israel has some specific labeling demands. One of which, and one of the, let's say, the most recent ones that came into force really 2 years ago. First step was January 2020. Second step was just a few days ago, 1st of January 2021. We have a new, based on a Chilean law, and we have some red, as you can see, red icons, red labels that must appear on the front of some food packages that have nutritional parameters that are too high according to the Ministry of Health definitions. So what you see here, if you cannot read Hebrew or cannot read Hebrew just yet, so there are three things. One, and you have the illustration in the middle that can help you. On the left side, you can see the kind of the salt thing. So it's high sodium, high salt content. So everything is with very definite numbers. So if you have more than X number of sodium, of salt in your product, you must put this label in the front of the pack. If you have more than X quantity of saturated fat, that's the second one. And in the lower part of your screen, you have a sugar content, a high sugar content. So this is quite unique to Israel. There are not many countries that have this approach, at least not mandatory. There are some voluntary schemes. So this is one thing that is unique to Israel. So as I talked about product compliance, you might consider knowing that because before you insert your product, or you plan of inserting your product to the Israeli market. So this is one thing that you know. But red always, like in traffic lights, come with green. So I have also some good news. So if you're in the raw product market, what I mean by raw is things that are not have not gone any processes like fruits, vegetables, I don't know, chicken, raw chicken, fish, eggs, and so forth. You might have the opportunity of labeling your products with green label, which the idea is to have the consumers know if your product is recommended for their nutritional needs, or if they should, look at it and assess whether they want to buy it or how much of it they want to buy. So there are some things there that are relevant. As I said, Hebrew, Corinne mentioned it's the oldest language. So we're proud of our language. At the same time, it poses some difficulties for guys like yourself that want to import to Israel. We have very few regulations that were translated to English. So most of them Hebrew. That's an issue. You just need to know that and have somebody help you with that. The fifth point that I would make is, and it's important for you to know, I called it Israeli regulation rules. What I mean by that, many guys that want to export to Israel or that import foods to Israel think and have a misconception that if they export already to the EU or the US or Australia, New Zealand, Japan, whatever, it must comply with Israeli regulation also because, relatively small market. So no, it does not mean that. Yes, our regulation is based on EU, US. We're trying to not to have barriers to trade here. And we're very open to trade and then to importation. But no, you have to comply with Israeli regulation, which means, again, you need to know that. You need to assess your feasibility. And that's not something that you can automatically assume that EU and US means I'll comply. So a bit about the documentation and about the process itself. So first thing that you need to do is have an importer here. So whether it's an importer that, like Ruben presented his own company, one of the biggest leading in Israel, there are others, so you need to have an importer. Other companies later on might open their own representatives. But first thing, I would recommend to just, find yourself an importer that you're comfortable with, and then go on from there because he's already registered. He can import foods to Israel. You don't need to worry about many of the things I'm talking about now because mainly these big importers know their stuff and they know how to do the things. So if you're not planning on really connecting an importer, you want to be your own importer and have a representative here, there is a technical process that you should go through, but it's really technical besides the fact that you need to have, or at least a storage facility here, whether it's dry facility or anything to do with frozen, chilled food. The other thing that an importer should do is have a declaration of compliance with the Israeli regulation. As I said, Israeli regulation rules. So importers should know that. They often use consultants like ourselves, or they do it by themselves. But anyway, they should know the regulations in order to help you guys come in the market. 7th point I would make, and asking you not how sensitive you are in your daily lives, but knowing that there is a difference in Israel between what we call regular foods, that's not the language of the law, but they're not sensitive foods. That's the vast majority of foods categories. And there are some foods that are considered to be sensitive. So there are things that you would expect to be sensitive, like dairy products, chilled salads, fish products, and so on and so forth, anything chilled or frozen. But there are some surprises there, like mineral water. So there is a list, actually, that the Ministry of Health issued. There are like 20, 30 kind of foods and category of foods that are considered to be sensitive. And the definition of regular foods is actually non-sensitive. So if you're not on the list, you are regular foods. It's easier to import regular foods to Israel. What I mean irregular is like, pasta, chocolate, bakery products. I've seen somebody ask about that. So most of the foods are regular foods, easier to import. So the import process in 1 or 2 minutes. So both regular foods and sensitive foods are now online submissions. So everything can be done online. Israel is known for technological abilities here also. It's quite new, just a few years, but anything can be done online. The submission of the documents, or if you ask me what kind of documents I need, so I guess it's quite similar to other regulatory system in the world. you need to have a product specification that will have all the characteristics and parameters that you might expect. You have to submit a label, again, Israel, so Hebrew. You might have some other languages on it, no problem, but Hebrew translation is a must. And you must have all kinds of other certificates like free sale, health certificates, and so on and so forth, depending on your product. So there is some documents to submit there, and there is kind of a small fee for the Ministry of Health, something around $120 and 100 euros, something like that, to pay. When you get to the port, and I'm wrapping up, there is a difference if you're regular food or sensitive food. So for regular foods, and by the way, both have the same submission, same documents required. Difference is that regular foods are not checked by anyone at the Ministry of Health while you submit the request for importation permit. When you get to the port, only 5% of all regular foods will be inspected at the entrance. So what that means that 95% will not be inspected, will just enter the market. Of course, it means a lot of responsibility on you as producer and on the importer, especially to verify that you comply. Sensitive foods are inspected at entrance, at least document-wise, and analysis, certificates of analysis that might be required, done by testing done by yourselves or by the importer here. Lastly, when you get to the promised land, the only thing that you should know is that the regulator here is open to change. We are in the process, and the Chamber of Commerce does a lot to facilitate this process, to go through some regulations of GIP, good importer practice, that will make importation even easier and will open up a kind of a green pathway to Israel for importers and for producers that comply and show a history of compliance. And there is also a great consumer awareness here. Yes, we have some class actions here related to mostly labeling and consumer issues, but again, feasibility, compliance will let you go through it easily.